Who were you crying for? Adrian Whitmore asked, and the woman standing alone in the Blackwood Estate kitchen froze. It was 2:13 in the morning. Rain whispered against the tall windows, silver lights stretched across the marble floor, and the entire mansion seemed asleep. Olivia Carter quickly wiped her cheeks with the back of one hand and reached for the folded dish towel beside her. "No one, sir," she answered softly. But Adrian had already seen the tears. At 43, he was a man accustomed to noticing what other people tried to hide. He stood several feet away in a tailored black suit, his black shirt open at the collar, revealing part of the black and gray tattoos covering his upper chest and neck. His dark brown hair was slicked back, natural silver threading through it, and his short boxed beard carried the same subtle signs of age. His expression remained calm, controlled, and powerful, but his eyes stayed on Olivia. She lowered her gaze and began folding the towel again. "You should be sleeping," Adrian said. "So should you." The answer surprised him. Olivia immediately looked down, as if she regretted saying it. For 11 months, she had worked inside his home without ever speaking more than necessary. She arrived early, left quietly, helped everyone around her, and somehow managed to make herself almost invisible. Tonight, something had changed. Adrian noticed her hand move toward the pocket of her uniform. "What is in your pocket?" Olivia hesitated. "Nothing important." "You were crying over nothing important?" Silence settled between them. The rain grew slightly louder against the glass. Olivia finally removed a tiny silver key and placed it on the counter. One word was engraved across it: Maya. Adrian looked at the name, and something inside him tightened. He knew that name. He had not spoken it in years. "Where did you get that?" His voice remained quiet, but Olivia could hear the change in it. She closed her fingers around the key. "It belongs to someone I loved." Adrian took one slow step closer. "Who is Maya?" Olivia looked toward the dark hallway leading to the West Wing. Her eyes became distant, as though she were seeing another place. "Entirely. Someone who should still be here." Adrian said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence could reveal more than pressure ever could. Olivia turned away and tried to return to the sink, but her hands trembled as she reached for a glass. Adrian noticed. He also noticed the small photograph partially visible beneath the edge of the towel. A little girl was smiling beside a garden fountain, holding a yellow stuffed rabbit. Adrian stared at the image. His breathing slowed. He knew that photograph. He had seen it years ago. "Where did you get that?" Olivia looked at the photograph, then at him. Her eyes filled again. "I was there." Those 3 words changed the room. Adrian looked toward the West Wing, where an old locked door had remained untouched for years. Suddenly, the woman he had barely noticed for almost a year was connected to a part of his family history he had buried and never questioned. Olivia picked up the photograph and the silver key. "Please forget you saw me tonight." She started toward the hallway. Adrian watched her go, but he did not stop her. He only looked once more at the name engraved on the key. Maya. For the first time in years, a memory he had tried to leave behind had found its way back through the quietest person in his house. And Adrian Whitmore knew one thing with absolute certainty. Before morning, he would find out why Olivia Carter had been crying for someone he thought he had already lost. By sunrise, Olivia Carter had already returned to being invisible. The kitchen was spotless, the silverware polished, and the last traces of her late-night tears had disappeared beneath the quiet routine of the Blackwood estate. But Adrian Whitmore had not forgotten what he had seen. At 6:20 in the morning, he entered the dining room and found Olivia placing a cup of coffee beside his plate. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." Her voice was calm. Adrian looked at her carefully. "Did you sleep?" Olivia paused. "Yes, sir." That was a quick answer. She gave him a polite smile. "I am used to early mornings." Adrian picked up his coffee, but did not drink it. "You were crying last night." Olivia's expression barely changed. "I apologize." "For crying?" "For being seen." The answer made Adrian look up. Olivia immediately lowered her eyes and began adjusting the silverware. Adrian had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from him. They asked questions, offered opinions, and carefully measured every word. Olivia was different. She seemed determined to take up as little space as possible. "Who is Maya?" Adrian asked. Her hand stopped over the table. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she placed the fork down. "Someone from my past." "Your daughter?" "No, your sister?" Olivia shook her head. "Then who?" She looked toward the tall windows. Morning sunlight had begun to spread across the garden. Someone I loved very much. Adrian watched her face. There was no attempt to gain sympathy in her expression. If anything, she seemed uncomfortable with the attention. Why do you still carry the key? He asked. Olivia touched the pocket of her uniform. Because it is the only thing I have left that opens a door. Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. Which door? Olivia did not answer. She picked up the empty coffee tray and turned toward the kitchen. You should eat breakfast, Mr. Whitmore. Olivia. She stopped. You do not have to tell me anything you are not ready to tell me. She looked over her shoulder. Something softened in her eyes. Thank you. Then she walked away. Adrian remained at the table, staring toward the west wing. Later that morning, he began noticing things he had never bothered to notice before. Olivia arrived before everyone else. She quietly helped an older housekeeper carry a basket of folded linens. When a young delivery worker struggled with several packages, she stepped forward and helped organize them without being asked. During lunch, she gave her seat to another employee who had arrived late and took the smaller portion without comment. Adrian watched from the hallway. Everyone needs help sometimes, Olivia said when the employee thanked her. Adrian remembered those words. That evening, he saw her standing alone near the west wing. She looked at the old door for several seconds, then reached into her pocket and touched the silver key. She did not open it. She simply stood there, breathing slowly. Adrian remained at the other end of the hallway. He could have called her name. Instead, he stayed silent. Olivia finally turned and noticed him. Their eyes met. Good night, Mr. Whitmore. Good night, Olivia. She walked away. Adrian looked at the locked door. For 11 months, he had thought Olivia was simply quiet. Now he understood that her silence had a history, and somewhere behind that locked door was a story she had been carrying alone. The door opened with a soft click just after 7 that evening. Olivia Carter stood alone in the west wing, her fingers wrapped around the tiny silver key, while Adrian Whitmore watched from several feet away. For 11 months, he had never seen her enter this hallway. Now he understood why. Beyond the door was a small room untouched by the ordinary rhythm of Blackwood Estate. A narrow bed stood beneath the window. A faded blue blanket rested neatly across it. Dust had gathered along the edges of the shelves, but several photographs had been carefully preserved. Olivia stepped inside and moved toward the nearest frame. Adrian remained at the doorway. You can come in, she said quietly. He entered. His eyes moved across the room until they stopped on a photograph of a little girl holding a yellow stuffed rabbit. He knew the face immediately. Maya, he whispered. Olivia nodded. Adrian walked closer to the photograph. This was my sister's daughter's room. Olivia looked down. Yes. He turned toward her. How did you know her? Olivia took a slow breath. I took care of her. Adrian's expression changed. For how long? Almost 4 years. The answer left the room strangely quiet. Olivia walked toward the old bed and gently touched the corner of the blanket. She was 8 when she died. Adrian looked at the photograph again. He remembered Maya as a bright little girl who loved yellow flowers and asked too many questions. He remembered the sound of her laughter in the garden. But he had never known Olivia was part of those memories. Why did you never tell me? He asked. Olivia looked toward the window. Because nobody wanted me to stay after she died. Adrian's brow tightened. Why? She hesitated. They believed I had failed her. Adrian said nothing. Olivia continued. She had not been feeling well that afternoon. Her mother asked me to stay with her while she handled something at the house. I stayed beside Maya. When her condition suddenly became worse, I called for medical help. Her voice remained calm, but her eyes glistened. I followed every instruction. I stayed with her until help arrived. Adrian looked at her carefully. And your family blamed you? Olivia nodded once. Some of them did. She lowered her gaze. After that, I was asked to leave. Adrian looked around the room. The photographs suddenly seemed different. This was not simply a child's bedroom. It was the place where Olivia had kept a part of her life alive after everyone else had told her to walk away. Why come back here? He asked. Olivia touched the silver key. Because Maya loved this room. I could not let the last place she felt safe become only a locked door. Adrian stared at the key. Does anyone else know you still come here? No, why not? Olivia gave him a tired smile. Because I learned that people become uncomfortable when grief does not disappear on their schedule. Adrian looked down. He had no answer for that. For the first time, the silence between them did not feel like distance. It felt like understanding beginning. Olivia walked to the small shelf and picked up another photograph. It showed Maya sitting beside a garden fountain, smiling toward the camera while Olivia stood nearby. On the back was a handwritten message from Adrian's sister. He read it once and then again. Olivia has always taken better care of Maya than anyone knows. Adrian's eyes remained fixed on the words. Something in his expression shifted. The story he had accepted for years suddenly felt incomplete. Olivia quietly returned the photograph to the shelf. Adrian looked at her. I want to see the records. Olivia's eyes widened slightly. Why? Because if you were blamed for something, I want to know what really happened. She stared at him for several seconds. Then she nodded. All right. Adrian looked once more at Maya's photograph. The room remained quiet, but the question between them was no longer only about Olivia's tears. It was about a truth that had been waiting behind a locked door for years. By 9 the next morning, Adrian Whitmore had already ordered the old family records from the estate archives. He sat alone in his study as pale sunlight crossed the dark wood desk, turning the dust in the air into tiny points of gold. Olivia Carter stood across from him, her hands folded quietly in front of her. She had agreed to tell him everything she remembered, but there was one thing she still could not understand. Why are you doing this? She asked. Adrian looked up from the first folder. Because I should have asked years ago. Olivia lowered her eyes. You did not know me. That is exactly the problem. His voice was calm, but there was something different in it now. He was no longer speaking as the owner of the estate. He was speaking as a man who had discovered that someone had carried a burden because he had never taken the time to look closely. Adrian opened the first document. It contained a brief summary of the day Maya became seriously ill. Olivia's name appeared several times, but every mention described her only as the caregiver who had been present. There was no accusation in the medical notes. There was no professional conclusion that she had neglected Maya. Adrian turned another page. This is incomplete, he said. Olivia looked at him. That is what I told them. Adrian continued reading. A record showed that an emergency call had been placed at 4:18 in the afternoon. The caller was Olivia. Another note showed that medical personnel had arrived shortly afterward. The physician had written that Olivia remained with Maya and followed every instruction she was given. Adrian leaned back in his chair. Why was this never part of the family story? Olivia gave a quiet answer. Because everyone was grieving. Adrian looked at her. Grief does not explain why the truth disappeared. Olivia said nothing. Adrian opened another folder. Inside was a handwritten note from his sister, dated only a few days before Maya died. The handwriting was unmistakable. Olivia has always taken better care of Maya than anyone knows. Adrian read the sentence twice. Olivia watched his face. What does it say? He turned the paper toward her. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Her lips parted, but no words came. Tears gathered in her eyes. I thought that was gone, she whispered. Adrian carefully placed the note on the desk. It was never gone. Someone simply stopped looking. Olivia touched the paper with trembling fingers. For years, she had wondered whether Maya's mother had ever believed her. Now she had an answer. Adrian continued searching until he found a personal statement written by Olivia shortly after Maya's death. It had never been included in the main family file. He read the first few lines and then looked at Olivia. You wrote this? She nodded. I could not say it out loud. Adrian lowered his eyes and continued reading. The statement described the afternoon in precise detail, including the moment Olivia realized Maya needed urgent medical attention, the call for help, and the hours she spent waiting beside her. There was no attempt to excuse herself, only a promise that she had stayed until the end. Adrian slowly closed the folder. You were never given a chance to tell your side properly. Olivia looked at him. I tried. Adrian's expression softened. Then someone should have listened. Silence filled the study. Outside, birds moved through the garden, and sunlight reached farther across the floor. Adrian looked at the documents again. For years, his family had carried a version of Maya's death that made Olivia responsible simply because she had been there. But the records told another story. They did not erase the loss. They did not bring Maya back. They did something quieter and more important. They gave Olivia back the truth. Adrian looked directly at her. I believe you. Olivia closed her eyes. A single tear slipped down her cheek. This time, she did not apologize for it. That afternoon, Adrian Whitmore returned to his study alone, but the room no longer felt like his. The old records remained spread across the desk, each page carrying a piece of a story he had accepted without question. He read the medical notes again, then the emergency record, then his sister's handwritten message. Nothing in the documents accused Olivia Carter of neglect. Nothing supported the blame she had carried for years. Yet someone had still decided that she should leave. Adrian leaned back and stared at the ceiling. For a man who had built his life around control, discovering that an old injustice had existed inside his own family was difficult to accept. He picked up the telephone and contacted the family attorney who had maintained the Whitmore archives for years. "I want every original document connected to Maya," Adrian said. "Not summaries. Not copies of summaries. Everything that still exists." The attorney agreed to search the archived records. By early evening, another file arrived. Adrian opened it slowly. Inside was a letter from his late sister that had never been placed in the main family record. The first line made him stop. "If anything happens to Maya, Olivia must never be blamed." Adrian read the sentence again. His jaw tightened. He continued. The letter explained that Olivia had been Maya's most trusted caregiver and that Maya felt safest when Olivia was nearby. Adrian lowered the paper. For years, he had believed Olivia disappeared because she had failed the family. Now he was discovering that his own sister had specifically warned them not to blame her. He turned another page and found a personal letter written by Olivia shortly after Maya's death. Unlike the official statement, this letter had never been sent. Adrian read it in silence. Olivia wrote about Maya's love of yellow flowers, her habit of keeping the yellow rabbit beside her pillow, and the promise Olivia had made to stay beside her whenever she was afraid. At the end of the letter, Olivia had written one sentence that made Adrian close his eyes. "I could not save her, but I never abandoned her." He remained still for several seconds. The words carried no attempt to defend herself. They were simply the truth of someone who had stayed until there was nothing more she could do. Adrian placed the letter beside his sister's note. Two women had written about the same child. Both had trusted Olivia. Yet for years, Adrian had known. Only the version that blamed her. The realization unsettled him. Not because he had been deceived by someone outside the family, but because he had never thought to ask. That evening, Adrian found Olivia in the garden near the white roses. She was trimming the stems carefully, her movements quiet and precise. "Olivia." She turned. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore." Adrian held the two documents in his hand. "I found something else." Her expression changed when she saw the handwriting. "My statement." "Your letter," Adrian said. "And a letter from Maya's mother." Olivia stopped moving. Adrian handed both documents to her. She read the first lines and covered her mouth with one hand. Tears filled her eyes. "She believed me," she whispered. "She always did," Adrian answered. Olivia looked at him through her tears. "Then why did nobody tell me?" Adrian had no easy answer. He could only tell her the truth. Because someone stopped listening. The garden fell silent. Adrian looked at the documents in her hands. "That ends now." Olivia lowered her eyes, holding the letters close to her heart. And for the first time, the truth was no longer something hidden inside an old file. It was standing between them, finally seen, finally believed. The next morning, Adrian Whitmore made a decision that had nothing to do with money, reputation, or power. He walked into the main office of Blackwood Estate and asked the estate manager to bring him every policy concerning employees who experienced a personal loss. By 10 o'clock, the documents were arranged across the conference table. Adrian read them quietly, one page at a time. The policies were practical, but they were cold. Employees could request time away, but approval depended on the manager. There was no guaranteed support, no private process, and no protection from being judged for needing time to grieve. Adrian remembered Olivia Carter standing alone in the kitchen at 2:13 in the morning, apologizing simply because someone had seen her cry. He closed the folder. "Change it," he said. The manager looked surprised. "Sir, no employee should ever have to apologize for grieving." Adrian instructed the estate to create a private bereavement policy, allowing employees to take paid time away when they lost someone close to them. He also established a confidential support fund for staff members facing difficult circumstances. The changes were not announced with ceremony. There were no speeches and no attempt to make Adrian look generous. He simply wanted the house to operate differently from the way it had operated when Olivia was blamed. Later that afternoon, he found her in the kitchen. She was arranging fresh flowers in a glass vase. "Olivia." She turned. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore." I changed the staff policies. She looked uncertain. Why? Because what happened to you should not happen to anyone else. Olivia studied his face. You did not have to do that. I know. He paused. That is why I did it. She looked down at the flowers. You were trying to fix something that happened years ago. Adrian shook his head. I cannot fix what happened to Maya. I cannot change what you lost. But I can decide what happens here from now on. Olivia's eyes softened. That matters. Adrian nodded. I think it does. For a moment, the kitchen was quiet. Then Olivia asked, why does this matter so much to you? Adrian did not answer immediately. He looked toward the window, where late afternoon sunlight rested across the garden. Because I know what it feels like to lose someone and then spend years pretending you are fine. Olivia looked at him. You never told me that. I never told anyone. His voice was quieter now. I had a younger brother. His name was Daniel. Olivia remained still. Adrian continued. He died when we were young. After that, I decided that being busy was easier than being sad. I worked. I built my life. I became very good at controlling everything around me. A faint, almost tired smile crossed his face. But grief does not disappear because you refuse to talk about it. Olivia set the vase down. What happened to Daniel? Adrian looked at her. I stopped saying his name. She understood immediately. That does not mean you stopped loving him. Adrian's eyes met hers. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Olivia said softly, maybe we both thought silence was the same thing as strength. Adrian nodded. Maybe we did. The room became quiet again. Olivia reached into her uniform pocket and touched the tiny silver key. Maya used to say that people should not be afraid of remembering. Adrian looked at her. She was right. Olivia smiled through the tears in her eyes. She usually was. Adrian did not try to comfort her with empty promises. He simply stayed there. Two people who had carried different losses were finally speaking about them without shame. And in that quiet kitchen, Adrian understood that justice was not always about punishing someone for what had happened. Sometimes justice meant making sure the person who had been blamed could finally stop carrying the blame. The next morning, Adrian Whitmore made a decision that had nothing to do with money, reputation, or power. He walked into the main office of Blackwood Estate and asked the estate manager to bring him every policy concerning employees who experienced a personal loss. By 10 o'clock, the documents were spread across the conference table beneath the soft gray light of the windows. Adrian read them one page at a time, his expression controlled, his tattooed hands resting against the dark wood whenever he paused. The policies were practical, but they were cold. Employees could request time away, but approval depended on management. There was no guaranteed support, no private process, and no protection from being judged for needing time to grieve. Adrian remembered Olivia standing alone in the kitchen at 2:13 in the morning, apologizing simply because someone had seen her cry. His jaw tightened slightly. Change it. The estate manager looked up. Sir. Adrian closed the folder. No employee should ever have to apologize for grieving. The manager nodded and began taking notes. Adrian instructed the estate to create a private bereavement policy, allowing employees to take paid time away after the loss of someone close to them. He also established a confidential support fund for staff members facing serious personal difficulties. There would be no public announcement and no ceremony. Adrian did not want praise. He wanted the house to operate differently from the way it had operated when Olivia was blamed. Later that afternoon, he found her in the kitchen arranging fresh white flowers in a glass vase. The afternoon sun fell softly across the marble counter, catching tiny drops of water on the stems. Olivia. She turned. Yes, Mr. Whitmore. I changed the staff policies. Her hands paused around the vase. Why? Adrian looked at her calmly. Because what happened to you should not happen to anyone else. Olivia studied his face. You did not have to do that. I know. He paused. That is why I did it. She lowered her eyes and adjusted one of the flowers. You were trying to fix something that happened years ago. Adrian shook his head. I cannot fix what happened to Maya. I cannot change what you lost. But I can decide what happens here from now on. Olivia looked at him for several seconds. That matters. I think it does. The kitchen became quiet except for the faint sound of water moving through the pipes. Olivia finally asked, why does this matter so much to you? Adrian looked toward the garden outside the window. His answer came slowly. Because I know what it feels like to lose someone and then spend years pretending you are fine. Olivia's expression softened. You never told me that. I never told anyone. His voice became quieter. I had a younger brother. His name was Daniel. Olivia remained still, giving him the same silence he had given her. Adrian continued. He died when we were young. After that, I decided being busy was easier than being sad. I worked harder. I built my life. I became very good at controlling everything around me. He looked down at his hands. But grief does not disappear because you refuse to talk about it. Olivia set the vase down. What happened to Daniel? Adrian met her eyes. I stopped saying his name. Olivia took a slow breath. That does not mean you stopped loving him. Adrian said nothing. For several seconds, the two stood in the quiet kitchen, surrounded by marble, glass, and warm afternoon light. Then Olivia touched the tiny silver key inside her pocket. Maya used to say that people should not be afraid of remembering. Adrian looked at her. She was right. Olivia smiled through the tears gathering in her eyes. She usually was. Adrian did not offer an empty promise or try to erase her pain. He simply stayed. Two people carrying different losses were finally speaking about them without shame. And in that quiet kitchen, Adrian understood that justice was not always about making someone pay for what had happened. Sometimes justice meant making sure the person who had been blamed could finally stop carrying the blame. That evening, the Blackwood estate felt unusually quiet. Most of the staff had finished their work, and warm light from the hallway lamps stretched across the polished marble floors. Olivia Carter was returning a stack of folded linens to the west wing when she noticed the door to Maya's room standing open. She stopped for a moment, then stepped inside. The room no longer felt like a place she had to hide. The photographs remained on the shelves, the blue blanket still rested neatly across the little bed, and the yellow stuffed rabbit sat beside the window. Olivia walked toward the photograph of Maya and gently touched its frame. I remember you, she whispered. Behind her, Adrian Whitmore appeared in the doorway. He did not enter immediately. May I come in? Olivia turned and gave him a small smile. Yes. Adrian stepped inside, his black suit looking almost silver beneath the soft evening light. His dark brown hair was swept back, natural gray visible through it, and his short boxed beard carried the same subtle silver. The black and gray tattoos across his neck and upper chest remained partly visible beneath his open black shirt. He looked toward the photograph. She really loved that rabbit. Olivia smiled. She took it everywhere. Adrian moved toward the window but kept a respectful distance. For several moments, they simply stood there. Then Olivia asked, how old was Daniel? Adrian looked at her. 7. Olivia's expression softened. That is very young. Yes. He looked down. I remember thinking that if I stopped talking about him, the sadness would eventually become smaller. Olivia nodded slowly. Did it? No, the answer was immediate. It only became quieter. Olivia understood. She looked back at Maya's photograph. That is what happened to me. Adrian turned toward her. You never stopped talking to her in your mind. Olivia smiled faintly. Sometimes I still hear her asking me to tell the same story before bed. Adrian's expression softened. What story? A story about a little girl who was afraid of storms, but loved watching the rain from the window. Adrian smiled for the first time that evening. That sounds like Maya. Olivia laughed quietly. It was a small sound, but it changed the room. For the first time, Adrian heard her laugh without sadness immediately following it. Olivia looked surprised by her own reaction. I have not laughed about her in a long time. Adrian nodded. Maybe that is part of remembering too. She looked at him. You are learning. Slowly, they stood together beside the window as the last daylight faded from the garden. Adrian did not ask Olivia to forget. Olivia did not ask Adrian to explain every silence from his past. Neither needed to. They had reached a place where grief could exist without controlling the entire room. Before leaving, Olivia picked up the small wooden box that held the silver key. I think I am ready to put this somewhere safe, she said. Adrian looked at the box. Do you want me to stay? Olivia considered the question. Yes, but not because I need you to fix anything. Adrian nodded. I understand. She placed the key inside the box and closed the lid. Then she looked once more at Maya's photograph. I loved her, she said. And I always will. Adrian answered quietly. You should. Olivia looked at him, and for a moment the powerful man who had once seemed impossible to reach simply stood beside her as another human being carrying an old loss. When they finally stepped into the hallway, Olivia left the door open. Adrian noticed. He said nothing. He understood what the open door meant. It was not an invitation to erase the past. It was permission for the past to exist without fear. And for the first time in years, Olivia walked away from Maya's room without feeling that she was leaving her behind. 6 months after the night Adrian Whitmore first found Olivia Carter crying alone in the kitchen, the Blackwood estate no longer felt quite the same. The house was still grand. The marble floors still reflected the morning light, and Adrian still carried himself with the quiet authority everyone recognized. But one door in the west wing remained open. Maya's room had become a place where Olivia could remember without hiding. On a cool Saturday morning, she stood beside the window arranging fresh white flowers beneath Maya's photograph. The yellow stuffed rabbit rested nearby, exactly where Maya had once kept it. Olivia touched the frame and smiled. "You would have liked these," she whispered. Behind her, Adrian appeared in the doorway. He did not interrupt. He waited until Olivia turned. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." She looked at him and smiled. "You are early." "So are you." Adrian stepped inside. He wore his tailored black suit and open black shirt, revealing part of the fixed black and gray tattoos across his upper chest and neck. His dark brown hair was swept back, natural gray woven through it, and his short boxed beard carried the same subtle silver. His brown eyes remained calm, but there was less distance in them now. Olivia looked back at the photograph. "I used to think that moving forward meant leaving Maya behind." Adrian stood beside the doorway. "And now I think moving forward means taking the love with me and leaving the guilt behind." Adrian nodded slowly. "That sounds like healing." Olivia smiled. "I think so." She reached into her pocket and removed the tiny silver key. For a moment, she held it in her palm. Then she placed it inside the small wooden box beside Maya's photograph. The gesture was simple, but Adrian understood its meaning. The key had once represented a locked room, and everything Olivia had been afraid to remember. Now it represented a memory she no longer needed to hide. Adrian looked at the photograph. "She would have been proud of you." Olivia's eyes filled with tears. "You think so?" "I know so." Olivia looked at him. "You never knew her that well." Adrian smiled faintly. "No, but I know what her mother wrote about you. I know what you gave Maya, and I know what you have carried since then." Olivia lowered her gaze. "Thank you for believing me." Adrian shook his head. "I should have believed you sooner. You did not know. I should have asked." The room became quiet. Outside, birds moved through the garden, and sunlight warmed the white flowers on the windowsill. Olivia closed the wooden box and stood. She looked around the room one final time before walking toward the open doorway. Adrian moved aside to let her pass. She stopped beside him. "Are you still carrying Daniel?" she asked. Adrian looked toward the garden. "Yes." "Then keep saying his name." He looked at her and gave a small, grateful smile. "I will." Together, they walked down the hallway, leaving Maya's room open behind them. Olivia did not look back this time. She did not need to. The memory was no longer trapped inside the room, and neither was she. The woman who had once apologized for being seen crying now walked through the same house with her head held high. Adrian, the man who had once believed control could protect him from grief, had learned something different. Some losses cannot be repaired. Some memories never stop hurting completely. But when the truth is finally heard, when blame is finally released, and when someone chooses to stand beside you without asking you to become someone else, even grief can become lighter. Olivia had not forgotten Maya. She had simply learned that remembering her did not require punishment. And that morning, beneath the quiet sunlight of Blackwood Estate, she finally walked forward without leaving the person she loved behind.